Hello everybody, this is, I'm gonna do the webcam video wave. This is Trace Peterson, uh, coming to you from Brooklyn, New York, and I'm here because Richard May asked me to give a statement about Troubling the Line and tell you a little bit about how the anthology came together. So here's the anthology, which I'm sure you have copies of it in the bookstore there. Hi Zoe, hi Julian, hi Gur. Um, um, okay, what am I going to say about this? Richard said, let's talk about, to say a little bit about how the book came about. Um, T.C. Tolbert came up with the idea for this anthology initially as he was graduating from an MFA program at the University of Arizona. He was going to different poetry slam events where there happened to be people who were trans, and he was going to trans events in Tucson, but he wasn't really seeing a lot of people who were doing what he was doing. And then he was at a friend's house at a party, and he saw a copy of my first book, Since I Moved In, which had come out in 2007, and which was sort of also one of the first books of trans poetry, and he said, "This is trans poetry. I recognize this. This is what I'm doing." So sort of the confluence of those two things then caused him to contact me, and we started talking about what we shared in common. I agreed to work on this with him. Um, And I think that the main point that we connected on from the beginning of this project was the idea of poetry's relationship to the body. That is, that there's some kind of a physicality to language which is not unrelated to what is going on with people's physicality in their lives and their identities and so forth. So I think that's sort of one of the main metaphors that drives this, and that we sort of, our interests coalesced around for this project. Um, what else can I tell you? So we initially, I added the idea of poetics statements to the book, and I decided to be the graphic designer. It was originally going to be published by EOG Books, but it got picked up by Nightboat, which we were both very excited about. And we initially sent out a call. Well, we did two things at the same time. We each knew like a handful of poets, so we contacted certain poets we knew personally to make sure that they had a request out to them, and so we sort of pooled our resources in terms of who we knew. Um, and uh, and then there was also a larger call for work, and we got something like 250, 300 entries from people, um, and so really we accepted work by the people we invited, and we also accepted work by as many other people as we possibly could, because we wanted this anthology to be as inclusive as possible. So one of the things you'll notice is it's huge. It's like a 600-page book, and there's a reason for that. And it's also, as a graphic designer, I was able to make it bigger like this against, I think our max page count was something like 400 pages originally, but I was able to make it bigger by making the actual dimensions of the book bigger. So it's an object that's easy to use and fits in your hand and so forth. So the body came into play there. But just in the sense of how we conceptualized the anthology, we thought about it as being a project focused on the poetics of the people involved. That is, that there's sort of an individual, everybody in the anthology has their individual poetics, and we asked them to talk about the relationship between their poetics and their poems. And I specifically requested the poetic statements because I wanted the authors to be able to give some context for their work. And so one could read the poems in the book and also read them in the context of what the author's project is or what the author's concerns are. Um, so so since the book came out, so the book was a finalist for the Lambda Awards in 2014, and that was good but disappointing because it didn't win. It lost to an anthology called Who's Your Daddy? Um, uh, and so, but it has had a seemingly historic impact in a lot of ways. It seems to have generated suddenly a dialogue about trans poetry, a lot of new publications about trans poetry, which are now out. Just a few of these include Vetch, the new poetry journal Vetch, Them Lit, which is another journal focused on trans poetry, and trying to think of what else. There was an issue of Cream City Review called the Genre Queer issue that was edited by Qingyin Chen, and there was also an issue on trying to think of what other there's one thing there's an anthology called Writing the Walls Down, which is it's kind of like the sequel to what we were doing in some ways, or it's a more it's an anthology that's more centered on people of color, that is edited by people of color and mostly featuring poets of color, most of whom are trans. It's not an exclusively trans anthology, but I think it's one of the most important new anthologies that I would highly recommend. Writing the Walls Down. It's edited by Amir Rabia and Helen Clinaris. I'm trying to think of what else might be helpful for me to tell you. I think, trans poetry. Oh, well, I started teaching a course in trans poetry at Hunter College. I think that's also one thing that this anthology enabled me to do that, and enabled TC to start teaching a course in trans poetry at the University of Arizona, or in trans literature more broadly. And I think it's brought a lot of interest to the idea of trans authors writing poems, which, as I can probably tell you in academia, when you bring this to professors in academia and you say, I want to talk about authors writing poetry who are trans, everybody just goes, like it's kind of huge cognitive dissonance, and it's interesting that there's so much cognitive dissonance around it. Um, so let's see, what else can I tell you? I don't know. I think that's about it for now. Um, so that anyway, that's Troubling the Line. I'm proud that we're showing up for each other and for ourselves, and I'm proud to be featured in this book with all these wonderful writers. And I'm listening to you guys vicariously from across the continent. Okay, so I hope you have a wonderful reading, and thanks, Richard, for putting this event together. Okay, bye.